I have this tool I call a story template. I describe it in my book, but the way that it works is that you start out with just three. If you're going to break up your opening in just to three parts, what are those three parts? Or another way to put it, if the jurors could only remember three things when you're finished, what are those three things you want them to remember? So very often it might be, the company knew about the danger and they did nothing, part one, and then part two might be the company injured or killed, in part two, and then part three is the company tries to avoid responsibility, and that might be if there's a cover up, and then damages, and then the yeah buts, so you're rebutting. The very last thing is saying what they're going to say, but saying it first. So that might be a classic structure, but it's built on threes, and so that's really it can be a very painful exercise in many of these cases, spending that half day because I'm really introducing constraint.
Yeah.
And the idea that we've got to break it up into three, and then once we've got the first third, then we break that up into three. So I think the constraint is the most powerful technique to help to distill. And to me, it's about the difference between, often people might say, well, you need to dumb it down for the jury. But I say, no, you have to distill it down to its essence. You've got to get, it's still factually true in its essence and how it is that you find that. And it's so important because, from what we know about, the research about cognition and people's short-term memory, that you might have 25 amazing hot documents you want to show, and that's a big mistake some folks make is they just start laying out the 25,
Yeah.
but after number three you've lost them. They're kind of, they don't have a framework, they don't have a way to hold on to the overall narrative, and that to me is the most important part as I've worked on all these cases, is that you've got to front load a simple structure for jurors to their minds to be able to hold on to. But another way to help distill something to its essence, in that workshop, it turned out to work out really well. I introduced the form of a haiku. So a haiku is a form of a poem with 5 syllables, 7 syllables, and 5 syllables. So it's just 3 lines, 5, 7, 5. And then during the workshop, I just said, okay, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to write a haiku of your case.
Oh, wow.
And so we took the 2 minutes, and then in 2 minutes, people, I asked if anybody wanted to share. And Mike Kelly was there, if you know Mike, and he just like read his, and it was like, oh my God, as you started to hear some of these short poems, it got right down to the heart of the emotion. It was very engaging. It was distilled down to its essence. So that could be a handy thing to try, is just, can I write a 5, 7, 5 poem and try to distill it down quickly. But I think the key there is just to do it quick. Just give yourself 2 minutes, 5 minutes, and try that. Or with some colleagues on their cases, get together and do that. That could be a really powerful way to distill something.
I want to try. That's awesome. I want to try that. I've heard people say that you should be high tech and create this immersive experience. I've heard people say, no, 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 use boards. Boards are permanent, and high tech looks like a cartoon. I know people say, well, look for physical things that you can interactive and have sit around and leave on the council table, or leave, somewhere where they can see them the whole time. And you seem to be advocating for a mix. What is the thought behind that?
Yeah, I say do both, and then use the PowerPoint, use the images as the master narrative that ties it all together. So, for example, if you are using the theme about red flags, like the company had a study that warned against adverse effects, that you have on the slide, it would be a picture of a red flag, next to the document, and then you actually have a red flag, in person, on the table, and you put the first red flag down, and then the next slide might be talking about the next document and the next evidence that they ignored, and you do a second red flag. But then on your table, you've already got the first one, and now you put a second one down until your table you're filling up with 16 red flags. And so that serves, the rhetorical and visual, those devices help to use the power of the screen itself to illustrate this and to focus on that red flag. But then now having this in person, that would be an example of it's a persistent visual presence that now has more power, and then when you turn the PowerPoint off, it's still there. And that's a good example, like you mentioned, the boards. You can have things showing up on the screen, but then you're building something on the board, and then on like a timeline, for example, you might build that and add stuff onto the timeline. But the two are working in conjunction. So the beauty of the screen and the power of the screen is to focus and to magnify in any particular piece of information. And then these other mediums can be great ways to show the persistence or keep it in focus for a longer period after you're done looking at any particular slide.
And to all of our listeners, I mean, I know a lot of us listen to this while we're walking or jogging or driving in the car, and I appreciate that. But for this particular episode, I mean, Cliff just held up a red flag, and the first thing I wrote down is like, where can I buy a red flag? Because you're going to want to watch you want to go to our YouTube page and watch, because he's held up a bucket, he's held up a flag. It's only been a few things, but it's inspiring. And I just want to tell you, Cliff, I mean, I'm so glad we're doing this. I'm like, that is such a great idea. That's such a great idea. But I do encourage the listeners, this is one you might want to watch a little bit, and definitely, look in the show notes. We'll have links about where you can buy a red flag. I'm not going to say where to buy a blue bucket, because I think anyone can figure that out.
But $4 on Amazon.
Yeah, I would say Walmart, but that's